The letter I am about to describe was written on pink stationery. My sister Deja had used pink stationery her entire life, since she was 8 years old, and our grandmother gave her a box of it for Christmas, with her initials embossed in gold at the top. It was her signature, her brand, the particular affectation of a woman who understood that details create impressions. The letter was dated 14 months before the day I read it. It was addressed to my daughter, Maya, my 13-year-old daughter, who I had last held at an airport in Jacksonville, North Carolina, 26 months earlier, who I had kissed on the top of her head and told I would be home before she knew it. The letter said, in my sister's handwriting, on pink stationery with gold initials at the top, that Maya should understand that her mother had made her choices, that some women chose their careers over their families, that Maya was loved, by Deja, by family who was actually present, and that she shouldn't spend her teenage years waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. The letter was signed, with love, Aunt Deja. P.S. Your mom asked me to tell you she's okay. I read that letter standing in the kitchen of the house in Jacksonville that I had come home to find emptied of my children. My hands were completely still. I have diffused ordnance in Helmand Province with steadier hands than I had reading that letter. And I had diffused ordnance in Helmand Province with completely steady hands. The stillness was not calm. It was the stillness that comes before a decision that cannot be undone. Part 1. The Betrayal. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Ava Simmons, United States Marine Corps. I am 43 years old. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee, the older of 2 daughters of Marcus and Celestine Simmons. My father a high school football coach, my mother a licensed practical nurse who worked double shifts at Methodist Hospital for 22 years, and never once complained about it in a way that cost anyone else their comfort. I grew up in a household where service was not a concept, but a practice. My mother served her patients, my father served his players. The idea that you gave your best to what you were responsible for, without reservation, and without expecting recognition, was simply the operating assumption of our home. I enlisted in the Marine Corps at 18, in 1999, the year my father was diagnosed with Parkinson's, not because of the diagnosis, but because I had always been pointed toward the military, the way some people are pointed toward a vocation that precedes their conscious awareness of it. I went to officer candidate school at 21, after completing my undergraduate degree on a military scholarship, was commissioned as a second lieutenant, and spent the next 22 years building a career in logistics and operational planning that took me to Iraq, Afghanistan, Djibouti, and assignments too classified to enumerate. I was also a mother. I married James Simmons, no relation we used to joke, in 2005. James was a civil engineer, patient and grounded, and possessed of the particular strength required to be the primary parent in a household where the other parent deploys. We had 2 children, Marcus, named for my father, born in 2007, and Maya, born in 2009. James died in 2017, a sudden cardiac event, at 41 years old, no warning, no prior condition, no preparation possible. One Tuesday morning he was making coffee, and by the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. I want to say something about that loss before I go further, because it is the context that makes everything that follows both more comprehensible and more devastating. When James died, I became a single military parent with a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old, and a career that the Marine Corps had not designed around single parenthood. I managed it because managing impossible things was something I had spent 20 years training for. But the cost of managing it was real and ongoing, and there was not a single day in the years after James's death when I did not carry the weight of what my children might be missing. That weight made me vulnerable to my sister in ways I had not anticipated. Deja is 4 years younger than me. She had grown up in the same household, received the same lessons, and had drawn from them, somehow, almost opposite conclusions. Where I had internalized our parents' service ethic into a disciplined external practice, Deja had developed a more sophisticated relationship with the appearance of virtue versus its substance. She was generous in visible ways and self-interested in invisible ones. She was the family member who showed up with flowers and left before the dishes needed washing. She was the friend who was excellent in a crisis and unreliable in the maintenance. After James died, Deja moved to Jacksonville to help with Marcus and Maya. It was presented, and at the time I experienced it, as an act of profound familial love. She found an apartment nearby, enrolled as a part-time graduate student at a local university, and became the adult presence in my children's lives during my deployments in a way that I was genuinely, deeply grateful for. She also became, over the following years, the person who had the most access to my life. She had a key to my house. She had access to my children's school records and medical appointments. She had, for practical purposes related to managing household matters during my absences, limited access to certain administrative information, nothing financial, nothing classified, but enough to understand the infrastructure of my life. She also knew, because I had discussed it with her openly, the financial architecture of my military career, my pay grade, my benefits, my VA entitlements, the general structure of what a lieutenant colonel's compensation and benefits package looked like. The classified deployment that preceded the homecoming I'm about to describe began in February of 2021. I cannot detail its nature or location. What I can tell you is that it was 26 months long. It was conducted under communication restrictions that limited my contact with family to encrypted brief messages at irregular intervals, and it ended in April of 2023. I came home to an empty house. Not physically empty. The furniture was there, the children's photographs still on the walls, the evidence of a household still present. But Marcus was at our parents' house in Memphis. He had, I would learn, been there for 8 months. Maya was also in Memphis. James's mother, who lived in Charlotte, had been told that I had requested the children be relocated because my assignment had become indefinite. Deja was nowhere. Her apartment was vacant. Her lease ended 6 months earlier. I stood in my kitchen with my duffel bag still over my shoulder, and a specific kind of fear that has nothing to do with combat. The fear of the parent who cannot account for her children, moving through me like ice water. I called my mother. "Baby," my mother said, in a voice that told me immediately she had been waiting for this call, and was not sure how to begin what she had to tell me. "Where are you right now?" "Jacksonville," I said. "Where are my children?" "They're here," she said. "They're safe, they're with us. But Ava, I need to tell you some things." Part 2. The Fall. I drove to Memphis the next morning. 14 hours. I stopped twice for gas and coffee, and didn't sleep. My children were at my parents' house in Whitehaven, where I had grown up, in the bedrooms my mother had prepared for them, with the particular care she brought to everything. Marcus was 15, taller than I expected.
Children grow without asking permission, and deployments mean you miss the increments.
Maya was 13, with her father's eyes and my mother's mouth, and an expression when she saw me that broke something open in my chest. She didn't run to me immediately. She stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at me for a long moment, calculating, assessing, a child who had been told things about me that I didn't yet know, and was running what she'd been told against what she was seeing. "You came back," she said. It was not entirely a greeting. "I always come back," I said. "Aunt Deja said," she started. "I know," I said, though I didn't yet know everything. "I'm going to explain everything, but first I need you to know that whatever you were told, I have been trying to reach you for 26 months, and I never stopped." Maya looked at me for another long moment. Then she crossed the room and let me hold her, and I stood in my parents' living room holding my 13-year-old daughter and feeling the 14 hours of driving and the 26 months of deployment and something much larger and older than either of those things settling into my bones. The full picture assembled over the following days, through conversations with my parents, with Marcus and Maya, with James's mother in Charlotte, and eventually with a JAG officer I contacted through my base command. What Deja had done was, in scope and duration, extraordinary. It had begun, as best as investigators would later reconstruct, approximately 8 months into my deployment, October of 2021. Deja had begun, at that point, representing herself in certain administrative contexts as my power of attorney. She had a legitimate limited power of attorney that I had granted her for specific household management purposes. She had used that document with modifications that federal document examiners would later determine were fraudulent to expand her apparent authority into financial and benefits territory. She had contacted the VA on my behalf, presenting herself as my authorized representative, and initiated a benefits review that resulted in additional compensation payments being routed to an account she controlled. She had used my military identification information, my service number, my rank, my benefits designation, to access and redirect multiple streams of compensation over the following 18 months. She had also, and this was the piece that landed differently than the financial fraud, systematically told my children that I had chosen not to come home. Not that the deployment had extended, not that communication was restricted, that I had chosen in an ongoing present tense way to prioritize my career over my family. The pink letter to Maya was one of at least 7 communications, letters, one phone call that Maya had recorded on her phone because something felt wrong, a conversation relayed through my mother, that had been designed to reframe my absence as abandonment. When my command began their own investigation, which happened within 72 hours of my return, because I reported everything immediately, the financial picture became even clearer. The total of fraudulent benefits, redirected pay, and fraudulent VA claims over the 18-month active fraud period came to approximately $2.1 million. $2.1 million. Deja had moved through the money in ways that investigators described as characteristic of someone who believed the scheme would never be exposed. Large purchases, international travel, a condominium in Atlanta purchased in cash, jewelry, a pattern of spending that was not cautious but expansive. She was living in Atlanta when federal agents arrived at her door in May of 2023. I was in Memphis with my children. My phone rang at 7:15 in the morning. It was a federal agent named David Chow, who had been coordinating with both the VA Fraud Investigation Unit and the Department of Defense's Criminal Investigation Service. "Lieutenant Colonel Simmons," he said, "we have your sister in custody." I sat in my childhood kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. "Okay," I said. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I thought about the pink letter, about Maya standing in the doorway, calculating whether to trust me, about Marcus, who had barely spoken to me in the first 3 days, who carried something behind his eyes that would take months to understand was grief. Grief for the version of his mother the letters had described, whom he had begun, against his own will, to believe in. "I need to be there for the trial," I said. "Whatever that requires, I need to be in the room." "You'll be there, ma'am," he said. Discovery. The investigation produced evidence that reframed 18 months of my children's lives in ways that were both clarifying and devastating. The phone recording Maya had made, a 12-year-old's instinctive documentation of something that felt wrong, recorded on a cracked screen phone and saved without telling anyone, turned out to be one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the case. In the recording, Deja was talking to Maya about me, about a conversation Deja claimed I had asked her to relay. In Deja's telling, I had said that the deployment was likely to extend indefinitely, and that the children should start building their lives around what was realistic, rather than waiting for something that might not come. Maya, at 12, had heard something in the phrasing that didn't sound like her mother. She had pressed record. David Chow, when he heard the recording, went very quiet. "Your daughter," he said, "may have saved this case's most important piece of direct evidence." "She's her father's daughter," I said. James had been meticulous. He kept records of everything. He had taught Marcus and Maya to pay attention to details before he died, in the way of an engineer who understood that details are where truth lives. The document forensics were equally significant. The modified power of attorney had been altered with professional skill, not the crude alteration of someone working quickly, but the careful modification of someone who had planned this, who had perhaps sought assistance from someone with document expertise. Federal examiners flagged the alterations within 48 hours of obtaining the original documents. The VA records showed a pattern that investigators described as deliberate and sophisticated. The initial contact, Deja representing herself as my authorized representative, had been followed by a series of escalating claims, each building on the apparent credibility established by the previous one. By the time the fraud had reached its full scope, Deja had managed to redirect pay streams, benefits payments, and VA compensation into 3 separate accounts, 2 of which had been subsequently closed, and the funds moved to a 4th account in her name in the Cayman Islands. The Cayman account had been opened in 2020, a full year before my deployment began. She had planned this before I left. That was the piece that, when David Chow told me, required me to sit with for a very long time. She had stood at my door in 2017, when James died, and offered to help, and somewhere between then and my 2021 deployment, perhaps immediately, perhaps gradually, she had begun planning to use my absence, my children's vulnerability, and my own trust as the instruments of a fraud that she had started building before I walked onto the plane. I thought about what that required: the patience, the sustained performance of concern and affection maintained over years while the architecture was being prepared underneath. I had spent 22 years studying how adversaries plan and execute complex operations. I recognized the operational discipline. I just had not expected to find it in my sister. Part 4. Preparation. The federal trial was scheduled for February of 2024, 9 months after Deja's arrest. In those 9 months, I did two things simultaneously. I rebuilt my relationship with my children, and I prepared to testify against my sister. The rebuilding was the harder work by far. Marcus was 15 and had developed in the months of my absence's reframing a protective shell that expressed itself as surface cooperation and interior distance. He was polite. He did his schoolwork. He was home when he was supposed to be home. And behind all of that, there was a careful watchfulness, a teenager monitoring whether the returned mother would match the story he'd been told about her, in the way that people test hypotheses with evidence. I let him test. I showed up. I drove him to school. I attended his cross-country meets. He had taken up running, something I hadn't known, something he'd started during my deployment. I sat in the bleachers in the rain at a meet in October and watched him cross a finish line and felt the particular love of a parent watching a child who became something while they weren't watching, and it was full of grief and pride in equal measure. After the meet, he came and found me in the bleachers. He was sweaty and breathing hard, and he sat down beside me without saying anything for a while. "She told Maya you weren't coming back," he said finally. "I told Maya she was wrong, but I wasn't sure." "I know," I said. "I saved your emails," he said. "The ones from the deployment. I showed them to Maya when she was upset." Mom doesn't write like someone who's choosing not to come home. Mom writes like someone who can't wait to come home. I looked at my son. "When did you know," he asked, "that something was wrong with Aunt Deja?" "When I came home to an empty house," I said. He nodded slowly. "I should have called someone sooner," he said. I thought if I made enough noise about something being wrong, she'd take me away from Grandma and Grandpa too." He had been protecting his sister, a 15-year-old managing an adult's manipulation with the tools available to a child. "You did exactly right," I said. "You kept Maya safe, and you kept yourself safe. That was your job." He looked at the empty track. "What's going to happen to Aunt Deja?" he said. "She's going to be held accountable," I said. "The legal process is going to happen, and at the end of it, she's going to face consequences for what she did." "Will you have to see her?" "Yes," I said. "I'm going to testify at her trial." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you scared too?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. I've been in rooms where the stakes were higher. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "Mom," he said. "Yeah. I'm glad you came back." The preparation for testimony was handled with the same discipline I brought to any operational planning. David Chow and the federal prosecutor, a formidable woman named Cheryl Anand, who had prosecuted military fraud cases for 15 years, spent dozens of hours preparing me for what the defense would attempt. They would attack my memory of events. They would suggest operational stress affected my recollection. They would attempt to reframe the financial transactions as authorized. And they would, Cheryl warned me, attempt to use the complexity of military benefit systems to create reasonable doubt about Deja's knowledge and intent. "She has one specific defense strategy I want you to be prepared for," Cheryl told me, 2 weeks before the trial. "Her attorney is going to argue that she was acting as your authorized representative in good faith, and that the financial irregularities were the result of miscommunication and administrative confusion, rather than intentional fraud." "She's going to say she was helping me," I said. "Yes. What do you need from me?" "I need the letters," Cheryl said, "the ones from Deja to your children. And I need something that establishes her specific knowledge of what she was doing. Something she said or wrote that shows she knew this was not authorized." I opened my bag. I had been carrying it since Memphis. It was a letter, not the pink stationery. This was a different letter, written in 2019, 2 years before the deployment, when Deja and I had had a conversation about the future that I had taken as the ordinary planning of sisters who cared for each other. In the letter, Deja had written, responding to a conversation about what would happen to the children if something happened to me, that she would make sure the family was taken care of, and that she understood how the benefits work. How the benefits work. She had written it in 2019. Cheryl read the letter. "This," she said carefully, "combined with the account opening date, establishes premeditation over a 4-year period." "I know," I said. "You've had this since Memphis?" "I kept every letter she ever sent me," I said. "Since we were children. She always wrote on pink stationery. I kept every one." Cheryl looked at the letter for a moment. "Lieutenant Colonel," she said, "you are going to be a very effective witness." Part 5. The Courtroom. The trial was held in Federal District Court in Raleigh, North Carolina, in February of 2024. Deja arrived each day in carefully chosen clothing, conservative, professional, the presentation of a woman who wanted the jury to see someone incapable of the charges against her. She had lost weight. She looked, I thought, like the version of herself she had always wanted to present. The good sister, the devoted aunt, the woman who had simply tried to help and been catastrophically misunderstood. She looked at me once, on the first morning. I returned her gaze without expression. I was called to testify on the third day of trial. I took the stand in my service uniform. Cheryl had suggested it, and I had agreed, not as theater, but because I was a Marine lieutenant colonel, and the uniform was accurate to who I was and what had been done to my identity. Cheryl's direct examination was thorough and systematic. She walked me through the deployment, the communication restrictions, the empty house, the letters to my children, the financial discovery. I answered every question in the voice I use when I'm briefing a commanding officer, clear, precise, without performance. Then the defense attorney, a man named Robert K., who was skilled and aggressive in the way of expensive defense counsel, began his cross-examination. He built his approach slowly, methodically, suggesting that I had in fact authorized more of Deja's actions than I acknowledged, suggesting that communication restrictions might have created genuine confusion about my intentions, suggesting that a devoted sister who had cared for 2 grieving children during an indefinite deployment might reasonably have expanded her role in ways that an absent parent couldn't monitor. He was good. The jury was listening. Then he made a decision that Cheryl had anticipated. He introduced a folder Deja's team had prepared, containing what her attorney characterized as evidence of my authorization of Deja's representative role. Documents, correspondence, what appeared to be text message records. Lieutenant Colonel Simmons, Kay said, holding up the folder. Is it not true that prior to your deployment, you gave your sister extensive authority to manage your affairs? I gave her a limited power of attorney for specific household purposes, I said. And did you not communicate to her that this authority extended to financial matters in an emergency? I did not. Your sister has documentation suggesting otherwise, he said, and presented the folder to the court. I watched the jury receive the folder. Then I looked at Cheryl. She gave me the smallest nod. I reached into the bag I had brought to the stand. Cheryl had arranged for me to have it, which is unusual, and the judge had reviewed the contents in chambers the previous afternoon. I removed a single item, the Purple Heart citation. I placed it on the railing in front of me. The courtroom was quiet. Your Honor, I said. Cheryl was already on her feet. May I respond to the defense's exhibit? The judge, who had reviewed my bag's contents and knew what was coming, said, You may. The documentation in that folder, I said, includes a letter purportedly from me to my sister, dated August 2021, expanding her financial authority. I have never written that letter. The original was drafted, as federal document examiners have established, on a printer registered to an account in my sister's name. I picked up the citation. What I did write, in August of 2021, was a letter to my children that I gave to my commanding officer to be delivered in the event that I did not return from this deployment. My sister's documentation claims I wrote to her about financial authority. What I actually wrote was a letter to Marcus and Maya telling them that whatever happened, I had chosen them every single day of my career, and that choosing to serve was not the same as choosing not to love them. I set the citation down. My sister used my name to tell my daughter I wasn't coming back. She used my identity to collect $2 million, and she used my absence to rewrite 26 months of my children's understanding of their mother. My voice was level, not emotional in the performed sense, steady in the way of someone who has said the true thing. The documentation in that folder was forged. Every document my sister has submitted in her defense was generated after the fact by a woman who planned this years in advance and believed that the complexity of military benefits systems and my operational absence would make it impossible to prove. I picked up the bag one more time. I reached in and removed a bundle of letters, bound with a rubber band on pink stationery. I placed them on the railing. I have kept every letter my sister ever sent me since we were 8 years old, I said. Every letter she wrote on pink stationery with gold initials. 35 years of letters. The letter she wrote to my daughter telling Maya I wasn't coming back. The letter she wrote to me in 2019, where she said she understood how the benefits work. And the letters she wrote from 2021 to 2023, while she was spending my money and dismantling my children's faith in their mother, that describe her life in Atlanta, her new condominium, her travels. I looked at Deja across the courtroom. She forgot that I keep letters, I said. The courtroom was very still. Robert K. did not continue his cross-examination. The jury deliberated for 11 hours across 2 days and returned a verdict of guilty on all 11 counts. Deja was sentenced in May of 2024 to 14 years in federal prison, with full restitution ordered, the $2.1 million plus interest, to be satisfied through asset seizure, including the Atlanta condominium, the Cayman account, and whatever remained of the liquidated assets from 2 years of spending. I was present at sentencing. Deja spoke during her opportunity to address the court. She said she was sorry. She said she had convinced herself she was protecting the children. She said she had lost herself somewhere in the years after James died, had watched me grieve and serve simultaneously, and had decided, in some way she couldn't fully explain, that I would not have access to all of it forever, that eventually I would deploy and not come back, and that she was simply getting ahead of the accounting. I sat in the gallery and listened to my sister explain herself in the language of someone who understood, finally, that the explanation was insufficient, and who gave it anyway, because it was all she had left. The judge sentenced her without comment on her statement, beyond the procedural requirements. I walked out of the courthouse into a February afternoon in Raleigh and called my mother. "It's done," I said. My mother was quiet for a moment. "Come home," she said. "Marcus made dinner. Maya wants to show you something she painted." The something Maya wanted to show me was a painting she had done in her art class, a large canvas maybe 3 feet by 2 feet, in the bright colors she had loved since she was small. It was a painting of 2 figures, a tall woman in uniform, and a smaller girl, standing on what was clearly an airport tarmac. The tall woman bent down with her arms around the girl. "It's from a photo," Maya said, "from the last time you deployed. Dad took it." I looked at the painting. I looked at my daughter. "It's beautiful," I said. "I was going to throw it away," she said. When I started to believe." She stopped. "I didn't throw it away. I kept painting it over and over, different versions. This is the 7th one." "Why 7? "Because I kept getting it wrong," she said. "And then one day I got it right." She looked at the painting. "The difference is the look on your face," she said. "In the first ones you were just looking at me. In this one," she pointed to the tall figure's face, "you're looking at me like you're memorizing me, like you're going to need to hold on to it." "I was," I said. She nodded. We stood in front of the painting for a while, my daughter and I, in my mother's house in Memphis, in the particular quiet of a thing that has been survived, and is not yet fully understood, but is beginning, slowly, to be. The Marine Corps offered me a desk assignment in Washington, while the criminal case concluded, and recommended transitional leave during the recovery period. I took the leave. I spent 6 months in Memphis, in my parents' house, relearning my children and letting them relearn me. Marcus ran a 5K in April. I ran it with him, slower than he was, my knees registering their objections to 15 years of operational field work. He finished first and waited at the line, and when I crossed he gave me a fist bump that I recognized as the version of physical affection available to 15-year-old boys who are not yet ready for anything larger. I took it as the gift it was. I returned to active duty in September. I am currently assigned to a position in operational planning that I find meaningful and that allows me a schedule compatible with raising 2 children as a single parent, which is not easy, but is real. The pink letters, all 35 years of them, the ones I brought to the stand, are in a box in my closet. I am not sure what I will do with them. I am not sure I need to do anything with them. They exist. They are documented. They serve the purpose they needed to serve. What I think about most in the months since the trial is the painting, the look on the tall figure's face. My daughter painted what I felt at that airport in 2021, before I knew what was coming, before the deployment, and the empty house, and the federal investigation, and the courtroom. She painted a mother memorizing her daughter. She painted someone who knew she was going to need to hold on. She painted me, and she kept painting it 7 times until she got the look right. That is the truest thing I know about my daughter. It is also the truest thing I know about what my sister tried to take and what she could not take. The fundamental unreachability of what a mother and her children know about each other. The evidence that lives not in documents, but in the memory of what a face looks like when it's saying, "I will always come back." You can forge a power of attorney. You cannot forge that.